In an unsettling and foreboding atmosphere, Saima, a mother of 4, suffered a horrific assault at home. Over 60 knife wounds were inflicted upon her. The investigation revealed a complex mystery: who targeted this ordinary mother and why. In this week's case, I will discuss an unlikely love triangle that has caught my attention. With jealousy, envy, and betrayal, I have no doubt that this case would not leave you indifferent. The story revolves around Saima, who was born in 1982 into a Pakistani family that migrated to the Netherlands. The family consisted of her parents, 2 brothers, and her beloved younger sister, Sabah. Despite being 7 years younger than Saima, they had been a very close-knit family, spending a lot of time together. As they grew up, their bond had only grown stronger. Sabah had greatly admired her older sister and had seen her as a role model. Saima was a gentle and devoted young woman who had enjoyed taking care of others. It was no surprise when she had decided to pursue studies in nursing. Sabah, on the other hand, was more reserved than her sister, even introverted. She had looked up to Saima and had naturally decided to follow in her footsteps by studying to become a nurse as well. The family was Muslim and traditional, raising their children in their cultural customs while also being well integrated into their adopted country. They were highly regarded as respectable and hardworking individuals. After spending many years in the Netherlands, the family decided to move to England in 2009. They settled in Luton, 50 kilometers north of London, joining the large Pakistani community already established in this popular working-class city. They moved into a typical brick house. Shortly after their relocation to England, Saima's parents arranged her marriage. They made contact with a family in Pakistan who had also sought a match for their son. The marriage was arranged, and the groom, 3 years older than Saima, had never left his home country. This union was seen as a great opportunity for him to try his luck in England. After the wedding ceremony, he joined the family in their Luton home. Hafiz, the groom, quickly found employment as a taxi driver, and Saima soon became pregnant. A few months later, the couple welcomed a baby girl. It was customary for different generations to live together to care for and support each other. Thus, 3 generations lived under the same roof. Saima was happy, surrounded by her loved ones and now married. The only shadow on the picture was that Sabah, her younger sister, did not seem to be coping well with the changes brought by this marriage. Now, her older sister was less available for her, as she had to share her with her husband and their little daughter. The relationship between the 2 sisters was strained, and Sabah felt somewhat neglected by the one who was once seen as a role model. Over the years, Hafiz and Saima had 4 children. After their first daughter, they welcomed 2 sons before a final daughter joined the family. Despite her feelings, Sabah was still there to support her sister. She helped take care of her little nephews and nieces. Unfortunately, over time, the relationship between Sabah and her brother-in-law, Hafiz, took a different turn. Behind Saima's back, they dangerously grew closer and crossed the forbidden line, becoming lovers. Thus, within the same household, a double life began. For 4 years, the illicit couple continued their relationship behind Saima's back. Most of the time, they secretly met in the car. Saima, on her part, remained oblivious. She was a dedicated mother and hardworking individual. Besides taking care of her 4 children, she worked part-time as a nursing assistant. Caught up in the whirlwind of life, she failed to realize that her beloved younger sister and husband were lying to her and betraying her every day. It was difficult to fathom that her own sister could betray her trust like this. Unfortunately, the worst was yet to come. After a few months of their relationship, one day Sabah discovered that she was pregnant and confided in Hafiz. It was an extremely complicated situation. She was not married and was not supposed to have relationships with men. They had to find a solution. Hafiz felt trapped in a situation that he no longer controlled. He was completely shocked and felt like the situation was slipping out of his hands. He had no idea how to handle it all. Should he take responsibility and reveal everything? He sought advice from an imam, explaining the situation and mentioning his intention to marry his sister-in-law. After all, polygamy was allowed in Islam. However, the imam informed him that according to Islamic law, he could not marry both sisters and he needed to find another solution. For the lovers, there was only one thing to do: terminate the pregnancy and bury the whole story. Reluctantly, Sabah agreed to this decision and underwent an abortion. After the incident, Hafiz distanced himself somewhat from his sister-in-law. He wanted to mend the broken bonds and set himself on the right path. He contemplated leaving the family home to live with Saima and her children in their own home. On the other hand, Sabah struggled to recover from the disillusionment of her abortion. However, shortly afterward, she started dating a man. things went well and marriage was considered. Unfortunately, the two families failed to come to an agreement and the plan fell through. It was another disappointment for Sabah. She found it difficult to cope with all these trials. Madly in love with her brother-in-law, she suffered greatly from the situation. Every day, she helplessly watched her sister's happiness while being denied her own. She didn't understand why everything went well for her sister and why everyone liked her. Saima was married to the man she desired more than anything, and she already had several children. Meanwhile, at 27 years old, Sabah faced numerous failures. She was still unmarried and had no social life. Gradually, her frustration and jealousy grew, and she began to harbor a deep hatred for her sister. No matter how she tried to analyze the problem, she reached the same conclusion. Her sister was the cause of all her misfortunes because she was living the life Sabah had dreamed of. The more she sensed Hafiz drifting away, the stronger her obsession grew. Her resentment towards her sister, who was completely unaware of the situation, intensified. Since February 2016, the couple had been searching for a new place to live. After several weeks of searching, they finally found a house to move into, scheduled for May 25th. Sabah then decided to make a drastic decision. She had to eliminate her rival. Without that, she could never live with the love of her life. To have any hope of being with the one she loved, she had to get rid of her sister. This radical step was necessary to ensure her own happiness and fulfillment. To achieve this, she had to eliminate Saima, who had once been her role model. For several weeks, Sabah contemplated how to make Saima disappear. She first thought of casting a spell on her. She contacted a black magic practitioner in Pakistan and, in exchange for approximately 6,000 euros, asked her to permanently separate her sister from her husband. She also conducted numerous online searches, including different ways to kill someone, how to obtain poison, and how to acquire venomous snakes. Finally, she came to the conclusion that she would have to take care of the dirty work herself. She decided to kill her sister with her own hands. It was Monday, May 23, 2016, 2 days before the move, when Sabah had made the decision to take action. That evening, Saima went to work, taking care of Mr. Aji, whom she had to attend to in the evening. The parents, on the other hand, weren't there. They were attending the funeral ceremony of a member of their community. Hafiz was also not at home. He was working. Sabah offered to take care of her nieces and nephews, aged 7, 4, 2, and the youngest less than a year old. While her sister was at work, she called her on the phone, asking her to come urgently, pretending that her youngest daughter was not feeling well. She had trapped her by using the love she had for her children. A loving and fighting mother, without a second thought, Saima had finished taking care of her patient before rushing back home. In reality, the youngest one had not been crying. She was doing fine. All the children were asleep in their rooms. It was around 11 p.m. when Saima finally arrived home. She had no idea of the terrible ambush awaiting her. She had crossed the threshold of the door. Just as she was still in the corridor, the lights had gone out, and her assailant jumped out and attacked her violently with a knife. The struggle was fierce. Saima screamed and fought for her life. Unfortunately, the element of surprise and the tears of her attacker had eventually overpowered her. The scene was horrifying as poor Saima endured severe injuries. One of her hands was almost completely severed. In the middle of the night, some neighbors heard her scream. Chillingly, her eldest daughter, awakened by the noise and commotion, came out of her room frightened. The house was plunged into darkness, and through the stairs, the little girl called her aunt to find out what was happening. With no response, the child moved toward the sound she heard, and that's when a horrifying sight appeared before her. She saw her mother lying on the floor in a pool of blood. Terrified, the little girl asked her aunt what she was doing to her mom. Sabah, surprised to see her niece at that moment, had reassured her as best she could before asking her to go back to bed, which she had done. For Sabah, who had just savagely attacked her sister, it was necessary to stage the crime scene to make it look like the work of an intruder. She decided to hide the murder weapon in her room, had broken a window pane of the front door to make it appear as a forced entry, and in the process, she injured her hand. She also grabbed a few pieces of jewelry and her sister's phone, which she had also hidden in her room to make it look like a botched burglary. Then she took a shower and contacted her father. She told him, pretending to be shocked, that her sister was attacked and she was dead. In shock, her father asked her to immediately contact the emergency services, who quickly arrived at the scene. Upon entering, the police and paramedics came across a chaotic scene. The attack was extremely brutal, to the point that the police believed the assailant must have had a certain level of physical strength, leading them to suspect a man. They also noticed that the back door had been broken, indicating a botched burglary. Sabah was quickly questioned, and the scene was filmed by a camera mounted on one of the police officers. She then recounted that when her sister returned from work, she went to take a shower. While she was in the bathroom, she heard a loud noise and then heard Saima's screams. She immediately rushed downstairs and found her sister in a panicked state. She then contacted her father right away. However, despite her testimony, her calm and emotionless behavior raised some suspicions among the investigators. She didn't seem as shocked as one would expect after such an incident. It was as if she was repeating a rehearsed story. They also noticed the cut on her hand, and she claimed to have injured herself while bending over her sister's body, saying she tried to stop the bleeding with a scarf. The investigation began immediately, and the police asked the family to leave the house to allow them to work for several days as they thoroughly searched the house. The community in Luton was shocked since the neighborhood had usually been peaceful, and the idea that a prowler could have attacked poor Saima in such a savage manner terrified the residents. All vehicles in the vicinity on the public road were checked. They soon discovered that Saima had indeed arrived home around 11 p.m. She was captured on a neighbor's security camera. The autopsy revealed that she had received no less than 68 knife wounds. Several arteries in the jugular vein had been severed. She was struck again and again. After the first 3-4 blows, she was already lifeless, but the attack continued savagely. The violence and ferocity of the attack perplexed the investigators. Why would an unknown burglar unleash such brutality on poor Saima? However, no one seemed to have wished harm upon this mother. She was very well liked. Unfortunately, once again, the danger came from an unexpected close relative. The police then decided to question again the person who had discovered Saima's body. They believed that her testimony could have been helpful, and they wanted to learn more about her sister's personal life, her acquaintances, and whether she had any enemies. Sabah then led them to believe that she had overheard a conversation between her sister and her presumed lover. The investigators immediately saw this as a potential motive to explain the heinous crime. After savagely killing her sister, Sabah proceeded to tarnish her honor and memory, implying that she had led a double life. The Khan family was a Pakistani Muslim family, and suggesting that her sister had an extramarital affair was meant to make everyone believe that she had dishonored them. Hafiz then became the prime suspect as he would have discovered his wife's affair and not been able to bear it, leading him to kill her. The family's computers had been seized, and the police had stumbled upon Sabah's suspicious searches. They had also discovered that a few days before the murder, Sabah had purchased a knife matching the weapon used in the attack. After analyzing her cell phone, they had eventually learned that it was actually Sabah who had a lover, and that lover had turned out to be her brother-in-law. They had then focused on Sabah's room and, upon thorough searching, had found a knife, the jewelry that had been supposed to have been stolen, and bloodstained clothing. 8 days after the crime, on May 31st, 2016, Sabah had finally been arrested. However, despite all the evidence against her, the young woman had denied it. She had nothing to do with her sister's death. She had admitted to having had an affair with her brother-in-law, but she had claimed that since her miscarriage in 2012, they had both distanced. Unfortunately for her, everything had pointed to her. After several interrogations, Sabah had finally confessed to hitting Saima. To justify her act, she had told the investigators that her sister had constantly humiliated her and put her down. She had also claimed to have been manipulated and abused by Hafiz, who had been 10 years older than her. He had physically abused her on a regular basis and manipulated her parents into refusing to let her marry someone, doing everything in his power to break up the relationship and keep her in his thrall as long as possible. 17 months after the attack, on October 27th, during the first hearing before the judge, she had pleaded guilty. After a brief hearing 2 days later, the prosecutors had presented evidence of Sabah's obsession with her brother-in-law. They had presented several messages in which she had made grand declarations to him and had threatened to harm herself if he left her. In some messages, she had unleashed the hatred she had felt for her sister, calling her a bitch and accusing her of betrayal. They had also provided evidence that in recent weeks, Hafiz had tried to distance himself from his mistress. They were planning to move out, and he was afraid the truth would come to light. However, that hadn't stopped him from having sexual relations with Sabah a few days before the murder. The defense had presented Sabah as a lonely and unstable person who had attempted to end her life several times in the past. Hafiz, on the other hand, took the floor. He read a statement in which he claimed to regret his adultery. He said he regretted it every day. He recounted that it was she who seduced him. She threatened to harm herself if he left her. He was trapped in the situation. At that time, those 4 children were deprived of their mother, and Sabah was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years. In delivering his verdict, the judge addressed Hafiz, blaming him for his behavior. According to him, he manipulated Sabah, who was psychologically fragile. After this incident, the family left the house of horror. On that day, the poor lost both their daughters. Sabah remained in prison, serving her sentence. Her lawyers appealed, requesting a reduction of her minimum sentence of 22 years, but it was denied. She would not be eligible for parole. Saima had been a devoted wife, a good mother, a loving daughter, and sister. For over 4 years, she was betrayed in the worst possible way by her husband and her own sister, with whom she had previously been so close. Under her own roof, before her eyes, her husband and sister played a double game. What was deeply sad about this case was that Saima had no idea. The family had been very close-knit, and it must have been a real shock to learn about the death of their first daughter, but I couldn't even imagine their distress when suspicions had fallen on their second daughter. When the truth came out, it must have been truly devastating for them to know that this terrible tragedy had unfolded before their eyes for 4 years, and they hadn't noticed anything. Hafiz had known the family he had been in and the principles they had followed. Unfortunately, he had succumbed to temptation, and not just once, but for 4 long years. Granted, he hadn't been the only one in this adulterous relationship. Sabah had been just as guilty as him, regardless of who had initiated the seduction. Hafiz is now free. He hadn't been bothered by the law. Hopefully, this tragedy has made him realize his responsibility in this matter and that he has evolved as a person. I hope Saima's 4 children are doing well, that they managed to thrive despite the absence of their mother, especially the eldest who had woken up on that terrible night and had witnessed the gruesome scene of her aunt attacking her mother. I hope she was able to overcome this trauma and that they are doing well. Despite the sadness of this case, I hope you are still with me at the end of this video, and if you are, write Saima in the comments. I'll see you soon for a new crime story on the channel, but until then, let's stay cautious. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to follow for more crime stories.